This is Amie Potsic, and welcome to Art Watch on WCHE 95.3 FM, 1520 AM, and online at 953wche.com every Wednesday from 1 to 1:30. We bring you in-depth and behind-the-scenes interviews with artists and creative leaders shaping the local art scene to the international art world. I'm an artist, author, curator, and CEO of Amie Potsic Art Advisory. As an art advisor, I support collectors, artists, and institutions on curatorial projects, legacy planning, and AI. Thanks so much for joining us today on Art Watch. Today we're speaking with installation artist Miya Hannan, finalist for the 2024 Kite Prize for Contemporary Art. Thanks so much for being here, Miya.
Hi, Amie. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to get a chance to talk to you about your work. So let me introduce my guest. Joining us today is Miya Hannan, one of the 2024 finalists for the Kite Prize for Contemporary Art. Her installations, sculptures, and drawings try to preserve stories that are almost forgotten or would otherwise be lost using the archival quality of landscape and place. She's actively shown her work in many solo and group exhibitions nationally and internationally. She is a recipient of the Franklin Research Fellowship by American Philosophical Society and the Nevada Council Artist Fellowship. Her artist book, 3 Poems Disrupting a Language, a collaboration project with poet Bill Kelly and Brighton Press in San Diego, is now in the special collections of 30 institutions, including the Getty Research Institute, Harvard University, Library of Congress, and Stanford University. She was awarded with many artist residencies, including the Tokyo Arts and Space in Japan and the Gentile Artist Residency in Wyoming. In 2012, she was commissioned by TEDx San Diego to create an installation for their meeting and received the 2013 Distinguished Alumni Award from Mesa College, San Diego. And before coming to the United States, she worked for a hospital as a radiation technologist for 7 years in her native country of Japan. She's now an associate professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, and her work is currently featured in a virtual exhibition of Kite Prize awardees presented by Amie Potsic Art Advisory. So, wow, Miya, what a background.
It was long, wasn't it?
No, it's very impressive. It's wonderful. And I'm thrilled to see that your book is in so many collections. I just think that's so important as a way for artists to share their legacy. So I'm thrilled that that you have that under your belt already. And so your work is such a gorgeous combination of beauty, mourning, materials, and sensory experience. In the gallery, your installations are materially immersive, creating sort of a poetic and lyrical experience. It's exceptional, I think, that your process is based on hard data and research, yet it produces such a profound aesthetic experience as well. So tell me, how did growing up in Japan with its spiritual understanding of land and memory and ancestors, combined with your interesting artistic background, scientific training, and years working in a hospital, shape your worldview as an artist and then transform when you later moved to the U.S.?
Yeah, whether, we use scientific language or non-scientific language, I think both are really attempt to make sense of what's, going on around the world. They are just different languages describing the same reality. So I growing up in Japan studying science, but at the same time, I was surrounded by a cultural, spiritual understanding of things. There's a lot of superstitious things in Japan. So way of thinking never, weirdly, but, those two, seemingly kind of contradicting, things coexisting in me without any conflict.
Oh, that's amazing. So, yeah, you can see that in your work. Yeah. It's seamless.
Yeah. Japanese philosophy is kind of deeply rooted in Aminism. So there isn't a strict separation between the human world and the nature world. So land object, even in kind of absence, can hold memory and spirit. So that way of thinking shaped how I understand material or place or history in my work. So also, years of working for hospital and being close to bodies and illness and death made the presence of memory and unseen connections very tangible, not like abstract to me.
Right.
So one more question you kind of asked, about moving to U.S. Yeah, I came to U.S. about 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So when I moved to the United States, my core philosophy didn't really change, but I kind of became more aware of how different philosophical frameworks operate in this country.
Right.
Yeah. For example, kind of, especially, working with students and such. For example, like a European tradition, like idea of sublime, often rely on separation between humans and nature, which was, initially very difficult to understand for me.
Oh.
But at the same time, kind of, it hurt.
And listen to my surprise. I'm like, that's exactly how everything, the framework from which everything is taught here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's funny, but every time a student talk about it, and I had to understand from my brain, not from my heart,
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, though, I noticed that strong parallels between Japanese animistic thinking and many Native American worldview, which is kind of, land and ancestors relationship, or, inseparable relationship of those from daily life.
Absolutely. And where you're located in Reno, Nevada, you're closer to Native American reservations and more population like that than most Americans here are.
Yeah. That's something that's, definitely noticed that every time I show my work, people who really respond to my work, those people are Native Americans many times. So I realized that relationship between my philosophy and their philosophy.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But, yeah. Well, but not just, I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, but, over time, though, the more I, live here, the more diverse perspective have become more visible in this country and accepted in this country. So I felt now, more comfortable with the worldview I grew up with. And, I kind of feels like I find a place for it.
Right.
And, so, I can be honest to my artwork.
Oh, that's lovely.
This is how I'm feeling.
Yeah, I think the States, while, there's sort of a pervasive framework like you're talking about, it's so incredibly multicultural at the same time that there is a place for everyone, I think. I mean, I really feel like all philosophies and thought can be sort of under the umbrella here in an ideal way, right?
Thank you, No, I thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me.
Oh, yeah. Well, so how do you understand the landscape itself as sort of a living archive that you were talking about, where history, spirit, and material converge? And then how does that belief shape your view of death and your research at sites which are sites of loss, and your commitment then to making these forgotten Asian American histories visible? Yeah.
So, I think any archive a human create is inevitably biased, right? So, decisions are always being made about what is present, preserved, what is named, and what is forgotten. But landscape, on the other hand, is a much more honest record of human history, in my opinion. So every person who, has lived some kind of trace, footstep, altered ground, materials, scars, even if those marks are kind of, subtle, still, or, maybe invisible at first, but still I think, it exists in a landscape.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I love maps and the history of maps. And that's such a human altered political view of the landscape, right?
Yes, I agree.
They can be so beautiful, but, they really show human intervention, human power struggles, property, and the sort of seizing of property, and then worldview, right? Because most people make maps with their country as the center point.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're the center of the world on their own map. So, Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, you kind of also asked about, past in history.
Right.
And I also think we live in a world that is already enriched and shaped by people from the past, Their presence hasn't disappeared, in my opinion. It continues to exist around us, right, in land or material or environment.
Right.
So because of that, I don't see death as an ending, but as another form of being alive, one that exists kind of, differently, but still somehow active and present. That's kind of, see the past. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I think some of the past and the time frames that you're talking about in your work, when Asian Americans were coming here as immigrants and working on railroads and sort of being a part of the landscape, like that's still very much in the present of conversations regarding immigration, right? And regarding this country's history, because our country's so young that the history that happened within the last 400 years is still talked about, right? Where other countries that are older, they have a different sort of timeline than we do. We're teenagers. We're like an adolescent here with like, true, being moody and like having tantrums, how adolescents are.
Yeah, definitely. Japan has like a 3,000 years of history. That's definitely a big difference that I felt when I came here, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So to continue your question, I do use soil as a material many times. So because it physically holds layers of time and labor, movement, long, short, still land remembers all those layers of history. So, I think of soil as something that, can speak about those stuff, not literally, but, its texture, weight, presence, all those. So I'm kind of using soil as a witness or a storyteller of our kind of, history.
Oh, that's so interesting because in your piece in Resonance regarding the Truckee River, you look at the river as this kind of communication point and the surrounding sites that guided your choice around the locations and material and sound.
Yeah.
What did you hope the combination of gathering the soil you were just talking about with historical objects and the kinetic movement of the river that would allow viewers to really see and feel this forgotten history we were just talking about so that you could make it feel more immediate?
Yeah. So I think, you're talking about resonance, my work, right? That, I think kind of, that was to attempt to uncover the history and memory connected to Asian migrants around this, Reno area. They kind of worked for road construction and mining. Yeah. And I kind of, of course, my idea about landscape is one, but these actually, usually though, railroad lines are all, built along rivers because rivers were essential for transporting materials. So the Truckee River was kind of natural choice for me to guide my research. So that's kind of how I, follow the river to identify sites and, all those stuff that I discovered.
Of course, that makes total sense because, that's like the Chesapeake here on the East Coast, so that the entire body of water, which is a bay, but it has many rivers feeding it. And things would come to port off the ocean into the Chesapeake Bay and then make their way up dozens of rivers to move goods. So, and that has its own storied, difficult history of, immigrants there. Yeah.
I think, humans have lived with water, since we started. We cannot live without water anyway. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Well, Miya, I want to talk to you more about this. We're going to take a short break, so stay with us. We'll be right back with more Art Watch. Welcome back to Art Watch. I'm Amie Potsic, and we're talking with installation artist and Kite Prize for Contemporary Art finalist, Miya Hannan. Welcome back, Miya. And we're talking about one of your works before the break, and I want to talk about a piece called Echo and Crossing the Ocean. So what led you to create this piece? And how did your research process, which we were discussing, include collecting soil from the hometowns of deceased Japanese rail workers and hand copying their diaries, shape the work both as an investigation as well as a memorial, which inherently deepens our American understanding of this unknown history?
Yeah, that's a current project. So Crossing the Ocean actually began with an accidental encounter. I visited Montana several years ago, and I just come across a group of Japanese graves at Missoula City Cemetery. There were about 100 of them, and I was completely surprised by it. So I kept asking myself, why are these Japanese, graves, they are in Montana? And as I looked more closely, also more questions, emerged.
Right.
Most of the people buried there had died around 1900, many at a very young age. So when I tried to find, answers, but unfortunately, I couldn't find much information. So that absence made me feel strong responsibility to investigate, this history. So, yeah, and as an artist, the way I approach research is, very actually personal. I'm not interested in history, only as a data or statistics.
Right.
I want to understand it through individual lives, So about 30 of the graves included names and the hometowns, their hometown in Japan. So I carefully copied those information and hoping that I can trace, them back in Japan. And eventually, surprisingly, I was able to identify the hometowns of 12 workers from there. Then the project became less about conventional historical research and more about deeply personal historical journey. Yeah,
absolutely. So, how fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very important for me to, trace their footsteps physically for me. So I traveled to the hometowns of those people in Japan,
Oh, wow. How was that? Wow.
Yeah, and, it was like in summer, in August, hot and sweaty and humid, and I was walking with drink on my hand. And, but I think that physical work, and also I walked along the railroad in Montana where they lived and camped, that I needed to have that experience of those places with my own body in order to transform the research into artwork. I have to have the experience to make artwork. So those labor or repetition or time involved in those actions, for me, a part of a very meaning process for my artwork.
That's so interesting. I think perhaps with you as a human being, but also your experience working in the medical field and with bodies, as you said, and a familiarity with bodies. It's like your work is so sensory. It's so in relation to the human body. So I love to hear that you wanted to experience that with your own, yourself in the actual places, feeling that climate, imagining them having to camp there and work there. And then imagining, if people passed away so young, was it the hard labor? Was it an illness that spread through? I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, just, feeling the heat in Montana and such was, really changed, my perspective. then I'm not sure, how American audience will, interpret this, history. But I'm just, hoping that time and effort, my, time and effort embedded in the work allows, viewers to feel the weight of those, lives and recognize this largely unknown history as something deeply human, not or distanced or, abstract. So, physicality hopefully adds to the piece to people feel.
Absolutely. Well, and I do think Americans all, despite the political discussion right now about immigration, we all very much feel like our families were immigrants, everybody. There's no one whose family isn't an immigrant who is, been in the States for, more than a few decades. Like literally everyone comes. True. And all of our earlier generations and ancestors went through the kind of experience that those people did that you were studying, the Japanese, because, for example, like my family came over and they were farmers from the Ukraine and Czech Republic and parts of the, Eastern Europe. And they came over with nothing and became farmers here in the, in northern Pennsylvania, northwestern Pennsylvania, and worked on the railroads. My grandfather worked for, so it's a very familiar history to me. So when you're talking about this, I'm like, I really identify with that, that, and I think a lot of Americans do really. So I love that you're having that conversation.
Thank you.
I also love your piece, Distanced Connection, where you're using charged materials of soot and bone ash and branches. How do these help you explore what distance connection means, both, emotionally, spiritually, culturally, and then how does that work shift between audiences maybe who are Japanese or in Japan versus here?
That's kind of turning to be an emotional piece, but distance connection was actually created when my research was still at an early stage, and it grew out of my thinking about the weight of crossing the Pacific Ocean. I'm also an immigrant from Japan, but my experience is different from that of the first generation of Japanese immigrants. I travel by airplane, of course, and I always know that I can go back anytime, right?
Right.
But for them, journey meant spending weeks and weeks on a ship crossing the ocean without knowing, if they would ever see their families or homeland again.
Right.
So thinking about that uncertainty, like a mixture of fear, hope, expectation, or separation, that piece became the stories and memories held by the ocean itself, especially those of people who left few records and, often died before being reunited with their families. So I kind of use candle suits, but, I draw by collecting candle suits and bone ash and branches that resemble, also branches kind of resemble driftwood. I use them because they carry a sense of fragility and the remains, and the idea that resonance can continue to exist even when direct connections are broken. Well,
tell me about how you're using the chair as an object and an image in this work, because it's so beautiful and poetic.
Thank you. Yeah, people ask about chair all the time. I'm using chair as, as a kind of portrait. I didn't want to use, face or, that, I just wanted to represent individual. So I used, all those 30 different chairs represent individual story. And people tend to have their favorite, place to sit down in a kind of, chair, right? And that chair kind of stays even after they passed away. The, chairs kind of staying in the house and such.
Right.
So I thought it's a great way to represent portrait. That's why I used the chair.
Oh, I love that idea. Idea. And, even though the chairs you're using are hard chairs, even hard chairs, they show the human impression after the human is no longer in the chair. So that's fascinating. So tell me, after years of working with this material, with this subject matter, which is so charged, what does this practice of remembering and gathering and researching and listening to the land mean to you? Sort of what has it done for you personally and artistically?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, I kind of, still ask myself sometimes whether my work actually changes anything or anybody really cares. I try not to dwell into that, too much, but those doubts don't come up, as an artist, right?
Sure.
In many years, I think this practice is, much for myself as it is for somebody else. My work helps me remember who I am, where I'm from. I don't want to forget that I'm from Japan or that I'm a human being who cannot exist without the earth. Working with land and materials and memory keeps me grounded in that reality. It reminds me that history isn't abstract. It's something we carry physically and ethically. So, my process and the use of land is a kind of way of paying attention. I may be, I'm saying this because I'm a drawing teacher. I teach drawing at college, university. So, we teach observational skill, right? So I think about observation is an essential skill, kind of layer, meaning that listening to what's around us rather than constantly focusing on ourselves. This is kind of increasingly difficult in our current, time, but, this practice trains me to notice subtle signs. For example, the quiet cries of environment or society and community, even if the impact is small or uncertain, kind of act of paying attention feels very, necessary for us,
Absolutely. I think that's so interesting. And, the act of making art is important. It is for you, but it is a gift for everyone who encounters it, because then they have a broader understanding of both themselves and the environment, right? And history. So never wonder about the impact, because the impact is huge, both in, materially and physically, but also just spiritually. I think, what you're doing and what all art does is elevate our sense of humanity and our connection with the metaphysical. So thank you for what you're doing. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you today. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a very pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. To learn more about Miya Hannan's work, go to miyahannan.com. And her work is currently featured in a virtual exhibition of Kite Prize awardees on amiepotsicartadvisory.com. So please join us Wednesdays on Art Watch from 1 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern on WCHE 95.3 FM and 1520 AM. Recent podcasts of Art Watch can be found on 95.3wche.com, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also find the podcast of this episode and more information on my guest at amiepotsicartadvisory.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.